Ideologues, opportunists, or plain old traitors, this is the unbelievable story of the British and Dominion soldiers who willingly turned their backs on king and country to join the Waffen-SS during the Second World War. In this video, we're unmasking the Commonwealth traitors who fought in the British Free Corps. The man who came up with the idea of the British Free Corps was British fascist John Amery. As the son of a prominent conservative politician and later Secretary of State for India and Burma, Amery was born into the lap of luxury. Despising standing in his father's long shadow, Amery struck out into the world alone. After several failed business ventures, he was hard up and looking for someone to blame. Such a privileged upbringing had given him a hatred of communism, so he looked elsewhere, embracing German fascist ideals. The war was the best thing Amery could have hoped for, and he eagerly joined a fascist group in France, staying there for several years. In 1942, he was invited to Germany by several prominent Nazis and suggested forming a British Legion to fight the Soviets in the East. Hitler and the Nazi officials were impressed and ran with the idea. They had had success with many other foreign legions, so why not a British one? It might seem strange in hindsight, but recruiting Brits to fight for fascism wasn't as crazy as you'd think. Since 1932, the British Union of Fascists had been spreading a Nazi-style message of anti-Semitism, and in 1934 reached 40,000 members. Violence by the party's paramilitaries shocked Britain, and membership dropped off as war loomed. By 1942, the BUF was virtually non-existent, but its initial success convinced the Nazis they had plenty of British sympathizers. The Nazi Party's immediate goal was to gather 1,500 volunteers from POW camps into a newly formed Legion of St. George. The SS posted propaganda across POW camps to convince captured British soldiers to join. This was pretty unsuccessful, and Amery lost interest in the unit after constant heckling by crowds of patriotic POWs. In the end, there were 54 recruits for the British Free Corps, but the unit never had more than 27 members at one time. Even though the ideas man behind the BFC wanted an excuse to fight communists, the unit spent most of its time doing propaganda work. The BFC was kitted out in SS uniforms and spent considerable time in Paris and Berlin. The traitors were also paid a wage and taken to events to be shown off. Compared to the German soldiers crawling through Russian mud, the BFC had a luxurious lifestyle. But some of the more hardcore fascists wanted a chance to test their mettle. After lobbying their SS commander, the BFC was redesignated a combat unit on January 1st, 1944. They then began training, but as most of the men didn't speak German, it took ages. After a year and 3 months of training across Germany, the BFC was ready for combat on March 8th, 1945. Correctly guessing the Soviets didn't like traitors, nearly half the BFC ran off the night they were due to leave for the front. Turns out the Germans didn't like traitors either, as none of the SS commanders trusted the BFC enough to let them fight. The men were assigned as medical orderlies and truck drivers well behind German lines. By April, Germany's situation was looking hopeless, so the last men of the British Free Corps donned civilian clothes and crossed Allied lines, pretending to be escaped POWs. Unbeknownst to them, the British intelligence service MI5 had been collecting information on the traitors since the BFC was established. At the end of the war, all men known to have been a part of the BFC were pulled in for questioning. In some cases, this led to trials with charges of treason, but most were let off lightly because they weren't really fascists at all. So who were these men who gave up good old roast beef for sausage and sauerkraut? They weren't exactly a devious bunch of renegades. In fact, most of them couldn't care less about politics. What they did care about was food, booze, and women. Let's start with Private Charles Munns. Munns was a Scotsman of the Durham Light Infantry, taken prisoner during the retreat of the British Expeditionary Force from France in 1940. Imprisoned in occupied Danzig, Munns had been assigned to a working party, giving him a chance to travel outside of the camp. He must have had a good time, because it wasn't long before he had a pregnant girlfriend by the name of Gertrude Schröder. The Gestapo was furious and came after him. Guessing he was soon to be in a spot of bother, Munns joined the BFC to escape justice. He stayed with the BFC until there was a chance he would have to fight, at which point he returned to Danzig to be with his pregnant girlfriend. Aside from soldiers, civilian merchant seamen were recruited into the BFC too. One of them was Kenneth Berry, a 14-year-old boy who had lied about his age to join the merchant navy in 1939. Captured after surviving the sinking of his ship by a commerce raider, Berry decided to join the BFC after Amery told him it was a good idea. Berry was made a poster boy for the BFC and sent to recruit more members from a POW camp called Mulug. He met a British captain there who told Berry that joining the BFC had, in fact, been a bad idea. This was enough to convince the young lad, who deserted when his unit was sent to the front. After the war, Berry was sentenced to hard labor for his actions, but only for 9 months. He was described by the prosecutor as a young fool who did not know what he was doing and an irresponsible youth who was easily led. Several Australians also served in the BFC. One of them was the Merchant Navy seaman Ron Barker from Goulburn, New South Wales. Barker wasn't much of an ideological renegade either. He was described by his squad leader as a man of very inferior intelligence. Recruited from a poorly supplied POW camp, it quickly became clear that Barker had only joined the BFC to get more food, alcohol, free cigarettes, and a chance at hooking up with German women. His MI5 file states, finally realizing that the British Free Corps was going to have a fight, Barker lost all of his former enthusiasm for anti-communism and made himself ill by smoking aspirins. He was sent back to Berlin by a gullible medical officer. On April 9th, 1945, after a miraculous recovery, Barker ran off. The unit never saw him again. The British Royal Northumberland Fusilier Thomas Perkins was let off by the British government for his involvement with the BFC due to acts of sabotage. The thing is, it's unclear whether Perkins actually meant to sabotage his unit or whether he was looking out for number one. Perkins always seemed to have more cash than the other members of the unit, especially when things went missing. He claimed to have been a prison guard before the war, but his commander noted, his general character and behavior led me to believe that his knowledge of prisons was very probably from the inside rather than the outside of a cell. Perkins was caught stealing many times. On one occasion, an officer's pistol during a party, selling it to a foreign worker. Not all the men of the BFC were so selfish, however. The South African private Pieter Labuschagne probably tried his best, but he wasn't a good soldier. No, Labuschagne was such a terrible soldier that he reportedly sabotaged the unit's effectiveness by his mere presence, and was deemed to be so useless the SS refused to take him anywhere. When put on trial after the war, the judge found Labuschagne guilty of treason and fined him £50. While some men held genuine fascist or anti-Semitic views, these 5 men are representative of the majority who joined the BFC. The BFC was a disaster for the Nazis. Their propaganda efforts were continually undermined by the men's drunken antics and pervasive interest in the local women. As a combat unit, the BFC lost nearly 2/3 of its strength to desertions and wasn't even slightly trusted by SS commanders. The founder, John Amery, was one of the few Englishmen in Germany who genuinely believed in the fascist cause, but he never joined the unit himself. By 1945, Amery had gone to Italy and joined a fascist pro-Mussolini organization called the Muti Legion. He was captured on April 25th by partisans and handed over to the Allies. Amery pleaded guilty to treason and his trial lasted a total of 8 minutes. The judge announced, "Your fellow countrymen called you a traitor and you heard them, but in spite of that, you continued in that course. You now stand a self-confessed traitor to your king and country, and you have forfeited your right to live." Amery was hanged less than 3 weeks later. The rest of the men of the BFC were dealt with quickly and quietly, as the story of the British and Dominion men willingly joining the SS was not one the British government wanted the public to hear. That was the zany story of the British Free Corps and the men who turned their back on the king for food, cigarettes, booze, and women. But what do you think? Why couldn't the SS get as many British volunteers as they could Belgian or French? How much equipment do you think Perkins stole and sold off? How bad must you be to sabotage a unit from your presence alone? Let us know in the comment section below. And just before you run off, guys, if you're into history, make sure you check out our new channel called The Braved. We currently have 2 videos up there, and it's pretty much going into all eras of history and finding really badass individuals that we just talk about with high quality edits. So if you like this channel, you'll probably like that channel. And if you're more on the music side of things, go check out our Relax Jack music channel, where we use some of the music posted there on this channel. And if you want access to a behind the scenes Discord server and some exclusive videos, do consider donating to the Patreon. If you just want to join our wider community, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Discord for exclusive content you won't find on this channel. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.